Holy shit, you guys. I have only just realized how ungodly long this video is going to take to create. As I write this, I'm on 4,000 words with this script, and I've only just discussed chapter 1. Holy shit. My overall thoughts on the central segment of this narrative is that, while it doesn't feel as concisely structured as the opening, there's still a ton of overall great moments to be had here. Smashing the first flame clock, the Uni and Tyron campfire scene, the Agony and Ouroboros awakening, Ethel and Kamaravi's sacrifice, fighting DJ once again, and so on. I guess I could complain that, for a large stretch of this portion of the game, it doesn't so much feel as if the plot beats that are happening are natural developments from prior ones that naturally ramp up in intensity, but instead they feel relatively unconnected from one another. It doesn't feel as if it flows in an entirely satisfying way, if that makes sense. That's not to say our story isn't progressing, or the things that are happening aren't believable or don't make sense. Far from it, it just feels less compact or focused than something like Xenoblade 1's plot, where a clear, linear direction of rising action can be observed. The events here, on the other hand, feel more sporadic. Let me give an example. In relatively short succession in this part of the story, we witness both the reveal that Yorin is Mobius J and Ethel and Kamaravi's assault on the party. However, these two events are relatively unconnected from one another. Sure, they're both confrontations with Mobius, but they don't follow on from one another in a natural cause of chain and effect. Also, of the events that do happen, a good few I would have relatively minor nitpicks towards, which is something I can't say about pretty much anything that happens in this game's opening. Ultimately though, I don't feel these drawbacks massively dampen the quality of the story, despite how it may seem, because I think that, at least for this portion of the story, the focus is more on its characters. We get more moments of quiet reflection, scenes where they sit around a campfire and just talk, and they're some of my favourites. I understand that the game cannot be constant action, and so scenes like these are a lovely way to divide the more eventful moments, sporadic as they may be. Let's discuss some of the events which unfold here in more detail. I remember the first flame clock smashing scene really impressing me on my first playthrough, as it felt like a moment that, in the prior two games, would have served as a really late or at least mid-game plot beat. Here, it occurs in the second chapter out of 7. The sheer epicness of it, with the incredible music, fluid animation and outstanding choreography, made it feel remarkably significant. It's genuinely a phenomenal scene which feels like something straight out of an anime. It's absolutely action-packed and it doesn't let you breathe for a second. Our heroes are struggling to hold their own against Mobius K and, just as things are looking bad for Noah and Mio, we witness the second Ouroboros interlink take place, Lanz and Senna's. Once again, this moment is hype AF, especially with the weight of life kicking in the back. Uni and Taion also interlink here, meaning our entire party has now had their corresponding Ouroboros partner established. This is getting a little bit off topic, but I think it would have been really easy here to overemphasize exclusively the relationships a character had with their interlink partner, and deprive them of interactions or scenes with the other members of the party. Thankfully, however, this is not the case. I really like the way they did it. They are given the most moments with their interlink partner, which makes sense, but they're also given a few really nice scenes with other party members too, in a way which just feels organic as a whole. I want to talk a little bit about the portrayal of Mobius K here. Overall, while he does stray worryingly close into outright cringy territory in my eyes, and I get that that's kind of the point, but still.
It's the big bad boss. Boom!
I really like his characterization here. He perhaps isn't as outright threatening here as DJ was before, but he just has an air of really fun pompous arrogance to him that makes him really entertaining as an early game antagonist. The moments where he mockingly strokes the blade of Noah's sword and sways his arms from side to side in cocky derision as he uncaringly takes the soldiers' lives are genuinely great. It definitely succeeds in showing how little Mobius truly care about human life. We get some cool scenes introducing Ethel around this time, and honestly, my overall thoughts on her as a character are that she's aight. Overall, I like her well enough, and I think she's decently written. I really like her backstory with her having a rivalry with Kamaravi and her colony being demoted because she refused to take an easy victory when he had an unfair disadvantage, but I can't say I cared too much for her. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure why this is. Maybe if she got just a few more scenes I would have felt more impacted by certain events which unfolded later on. One of my favourite moments in this part of the story occurs when the party makes their way to the old Kana battlefield on the Raybell tableland. The visual storytelling of this place is really sweet. Charred and decrepit, it stands in stark opposition to the vibrant grasses and saturated saffronia tree which make up the rest of this area, immediately telling you something is not right here. But in Ionios, battlefields like these aren't that unusual, so it's probably just the scene of a regular feud between colonies, right? Well, not quite. Here, we get a great moment with Uni, where she discovers an oddly familiar fossilized corpse that triggers a mysterious memory too close to comfort. A vision of herself being part of a colony that was destroyed by a similar looking Mobius to DJ plays out in her mind, ending with her seeming death and triggering a panic attack. I think what Uni's character may be supposed to represent in this story are soldiers who suffer from PTSD. Her freakout here when confronted with a ghost of her past is very reminiscent of images of shell-shocked servicemen, and say that 5 times fast. This plot beat for Uni is also a really clever one, as it hints to us that there may be more to this world than meets the eye, even if it isn't directly explained to us until later. There is the suggestion that some form of reincarnation might be in place in Ionios. Something else clever the game does here is that it uses the arc or problems of one character, Uni, as a means to develop another, her interlink partner, Taion. The latter notices her shaking, believing it to simply be caused by the cheery world they live in.
I'll tell you!
And kindly gives her a cup of tea, but not to drink. The true hidden purpose of this act of generosity was to cease her trembling. This is a simply beautiful moment which massively strengthens Taion's character, showing he has a softer side when he lets off and is not entirely cynical. Seeing him grow like this was simply wondrous, with his particular character arc being one of my favourites. Overall, it's a lovely little moment between the two that progresses their relationship in a great way. Once we reach the Great Cop Falls, my opinions on some of the plot beats taking place start to get a bit more mixed. Overall, I think the Yorin/Mobius J reveal works well enough, but I just wish his characterization in this scene wasn't so excessively, over the top, almost goofily evil. The idea for his justification for becoming Mobius is that he is tired of being a weakling and wants a chance to become stronger, which is something Mobius allows him to do. An idea I can get behind, I actually quite like it. It's just that I wish we could have seen even a little bit of Yorin's former kind persona leaking through his perverted new self here, showing he does still harbour some amount of doubt and regret over what he's doing. As it stands, I don't know if I can buy that the unbelievably gentle, kind-hearted Yorin we've been seeing up to this point can turn into this.
I don't want to die. Don't make me die here, please.
I told you we shouldn't have come here.
You just have to make me. This is awful. Why are we the ones who have to fight?
The body may be mud, but their minds are the real deal.
It's almost too extreme. It's perhaps more believable if you view it through the lens that, being forced to view all his prior lives, in which every single one he died a weakling, caused Yorin to snap and lose his mind. He isn't so much directly responsible for his actions anymore, because he just isn't all there in his head anymore. This idea of a villain whose motivation for being evil is that they've completely lost his mind may have been purposefully neglected for Yorin though, as a certain other Mobius fills this role instead, to be fair, which I will get to later. It also doesn't help that Yorin is just kind of cringy, to be entirely honest. It's quite difficult to take this tubby, green-haired child who's spouting childish claims of superiority seriously, and he certainly isn't in any way intimidating.
Toodles!
Overall though, I think the core concept of a character whose motivation for becoming Mobius is that they were always weak in life and wanted a chance to finally be strong is a pretty solid one, but I just wish the execution here was a little better. Despite these criticisms though, I don't hate Yorin as much as some people do, and I think he's a good, not amazing, not terrible, just good antagonist overall, especially due to how his story concludes, which again, as I keep saying, I will get to much later. Something which actually occurred previously to this that I forgot to mention was a follow-up interlink scene which this time gave the Agnian characters the spotlight, rather than their Kevezi counterparts. This was something that was really nice to see, and again reinforces the idea that these two sides are, despite their hatred for one another, fundamentally the same. A small nitpick I have with this wanting to give the two sides a sense of equality though, is that I think it's somewhat of a missed opportunity not to have had both experiences pre-Van Damme shown. I understand this may have been an intentional omission to make the opening more fast-paced, but a cool way of getting around it could have been to either give you the choice of what side to experience in the opening, or to have made this theoretical Agony introduction viewable on a second New Game Plus playthrough. To be totally honest, this is in no way a real problem, and it's just me dreaming about something completely unnecessary. Anyway, back to relevancy. I also think it's somewhat of a shame that Isard's role in these scenes here end up feeling a little unimportant, as it's not truly him in the first place, but one of Yorin's mud puppets. I really like the idea of there having been a villain that didn't just boil down to being Mobius, and Isard could have filled this role, but unfortunately this was not the case. This especially sucks because his voice work in these scenes is phenomenal, and yet, once we learn he was never in control, his lines are somewhat robbed of the seeming emotion imbued into them.
To remind you of your past, to make you relive it and drive you to despair, to break your heart, to steal all that you hold dear, to ruin you to your very core! That is my revenge. It's payback for Nimue dying with her wish unfulfilled.
You may have noticed I haven't spoken much about Tyon's backstory, which is gradually being revealed to us around this point in the story. This is simply due to the fact that, for whatever reason, it ended up feeling kind of forgettable and generic to me. I'm not sure why, to be honest, but nothing about it really felt particularly unique or interesting. I think the fact that Taion is able to be one of my favourite characters down to personality and development alone then, entirely excluding his backstory, is pretty remarkable and tells you just how brilliantly our main party is portrayed and acted in this story. The next plot beat that sticks out to me that I want to draw attention to, and one I can't sing the praises of enough, is Noah and Mio's flute trade. I fucking adore this scene. So much so that I made an entirely separate video just breaking down why it's so incredible, which I will link here. Due to most of my thoughts regarding it already being contained there then, I won't talk about it too much in this video, but just know that it is a beautiful moment of growth for Noah and Mio that excels them into some of my favourite characters in the game and likely my favourite romantic pairing in the series. When I think back on Xenoblade 3's story, it's one of those moments that genuinely sits alongside hugely significant scenes, like a first interlink, smashing the flame clock, reaching the city, and Mio's homecoming scene in terms of notoriety in my mind. I think the fact that it doesn't play a part in developing the main narrative, and yet it's so memorable to me, tells you everything you need to know about how incredible the character writing in this scene is. The next major event that unfolds is one I am particularly ambiguous towards, Ethel and Kamaravi's sacrifice. On paper, I love the concept of their relationship and this scene. Two renowned soldiers from opposite sides with a lifelong desire to one day have a truly fair duel, unable to do so in the past due to unfortunate circumstances outside of their control. The interpretation that they covertly have feelings for one another, but can't quite understand it or don't know how to express it, perhaps due to the flame clock's influence, and so show it through an intense passion to fight one another, is one I adore. And yet, I find it difficult to feel anything for either of these characters, as I just don't think they were given quite enough. Kamaravi is especially at fault here, being given half the screen time Ethel had and no real characterization other than being a total badass. And he is, believe me. I mean, the moment when he takes his own eye out in this scene to avoid being controlled is genuinely fucking awesome, but I can't help but wish he had just a little bit more to work with. My core problem with this scene, though, is that the involvement of the Annihilator unnecessarily complicates things, and has the unintended effect of making Ethel particularly seem somewhat selfish. Prior to this, Mobius had blackmailed Ethel into, alongside Kamaravi, fighting the party, threatening her with the destruction of her colony via the Annihilator, a superweapon utilising the Black Fog should she resist. Their justification for having these two soldiers go up against our heroes, and not simply taking the fight to them themselves, they would almost certainly be more powerful, hell, they could probably just use the Annihilator to instantly obliterate them, is a little flimsy, but I guess it works for how Mobius is characterised in the story. To do so themselves would be boring and predictable. In this way, by having two soldiers seemingly destined to fight one another be denied this and made to take down what Mobius would view as a mutual enemy for them, they are provided further entertainment. Fair enough, I can just about buy this. Where I think this scene got the most confused though, was how Ethel and Kamaravi respond to the consul's blackmail. They rebel against being made to kill the party, and instead kill each other in a sort of frenzied, elated, mutual suicide pact. Before I somewhat shit on this, I want to say that their portrayal here just before the moment of death is admittedly really well done. I've seen some people in this community liken the excited nature of it to something almost sexual, and yeah, I'm being serious, which works well for their characters, if we take that interpretation as something writers were going for. The issue is, if you really think about what Ethel's doing here, it isn't great. She is knowingly and deliberately risking the lives of everyone in her colony just so she can go out the way she wants to. I'm all for the idea of her wanting to choose her own path in life, or rather death, and denying Mobius the ability to restrict her in this way, but it unfortunately winds up making her appear selfish. If the Annihilator wasn't directly aimed towards Colony 4 in this scene, I could buy it a lot more, but as it stands, my opinions towards this scene are mixed. I've seen some argue it would have worked better if Ethel and Kamaravi had instead teamed up to fight the consuls themselves, alongside the party's help, and I think I agree overall. But I also do love the idea of them finally getting that perfect duel they've been longing for so long. My feelings are very complex towards it. Maybe the writers were aware that this scene made Ethel look selfish, and this was intended as a character flaw, which I can work with, but the problem is selfishness is something Ethel's never displayed up to this point. If she was written to be flawed in this way the entire time, it would make more sense, but it just kind of feels like it comes out of left field and doesn't suit her character. Kamaravi stabbing his own eye out is still undeniably cool as fuck though.
I am under no one's yoke.
Something which came from this scene that I do unambiguously love, though, was the party's rant against Mobius, specifically Mio. Her speech is so beautifully charged, and you really feel every word, even if I doubt one tiny Welsh cat girl could sucker punch a 100-pound gigantic demon creature, but it's kind of funny, so I think I'll let it slide. The voice work of every character here is phenomenal too, especially Noah and Mio. Their words drip with raw fury. Fury that Mobius have imprisoned their world for so long. Fury that they've been denied the basic, fundamental aspects of life. Fury that they refuse to ever change. And fury that they drove Ethel and Kamaravi to having to make such a heartbreaking choice. The next big moment that I want to talk about is one I view as quite overlooked in the grand scheme of things. The second confrontation against Mobius DJ. This scene is ultimately all about Uni, and she's done amazingly here, with it serving as an excellent moment of development for her. I love how she understandably starts off terrified when coming face to face with the entity that she has just learned killed her in a prior life, and has her fear holding both her and Tyon's Ouroboros form back in battle. But, with his moral support, she is able to partially overcome that fear and best the Mobius due to this. Overall, this is just a great scene. It doesn't really relate to the story, but I gotta praise the battle choreography here. All of the scenes where Ouroboros forms fight Mobius forms are wonderfully animated, but for me, this is the one that's done best. It's all so fluid and natural feeling. All the attacks have a satisfying weight to them, and you really feel the power these forms hold. To get back to what's actually relevant, I only have one very minor nitpick for this scene, and that's that, for whatever reason, I feel specifically Dee's portrayal here is ever so slightly weaker than how it was in his first confrontation. He just feels a little bit less fun, almost, and more generically evil. The moment where he comments on how the party seemed to have thought his horns were just a fashion statement is cute, but it's not as well done as it was before. He seems to have lost some of his swagger for some reason. Admittedly, this overall harsher and less silly demeanour could be down to the fact that he didn't really consider our party a legitimate threat before. They hadn't even become Ouroboros yet, after all. However, now that they're starting to actually change the balance of power in this world, and they actually are starting to present a threat, he finds himself having to take them more seriously, and so is Nastia. Overall, my stance towards Dee is still that he is a more enjoyable villain than most make him out to be, but more on that later. After destroying the Annihilator and attempting to exit the castle, we inadvertently find ourselves in the throne room, where a lot of crazy shit is about to go down. This is the ending of chapter 4, and the sequence or density of plot reveals here is really quite impressive, and I don't think people praise it quite enough. In a relatively short period of time, we learn, or are at least heavily hinted towards, all the soldiers in Ionios are constantly reincarnated, who we thought was Melia is actually a robot for some reason, there's a faction called the Lost Numbers fighting against Mobius, and N and M are some kind of alternate versions of Noah and Mio. Granted, some of these were predictable, but even still, this is an incredibly eventful chapter closer. Let's talk about some of these reveals in more detail. The soldiers in Ionios being reincarnated after death is a really neat and natural feeling development of everything we've learnt concerning how this world functions up to now, and was cleverly teased right near the beginning when we see people being grown in the cradles of Kebes Castle immediately following a huge battle between Colony 9 and Sigma. I like that it's revealed in such close succession with the confirmation that N and M are somehow Noah and Mio, as it makes the possibility of there being two of each make much more sense within the context of Ionios. Now that we know soldiers can be reborn, why couldn't this be a reality? It's also clever that this reveal happens so soon after Ethel's death, as it's still fresh in our mind, and so makes this discovery all the more impactful and surprising, especially due to the incredibly rapid time frame Mobius can clearly create new soldiers within. Melia being a robot though is something I'm mixed on. On one regard I'm glad, as I was slightly concerned Monolith could try to pull some Melia and Nia become evil plot beat that doesn't really suit their characters and just feels cheap. On the other hand, it just feels kind of silly? I'm not sure how to explain it, but it doesn't feel anywhere near as cool or unique as the plot reveal Xenoblade is so adored for. It's too simple and safe. I do think the idea of Mobius creating these mechanical duplicates of the queens so that they can act as figureheads for the soldiers to look up to, almost as a kind of morale booster, is interesting, but I do think they were perhaps given a little bit too much focus, especially in the pre-release material, leading to this reveal feeling somewhat underwhelming. Overall though, I do think this is a decent plot twist or plot reveal. It's not great, it's not terrible, it's just alright. It works well enough. The existence of the lost numbers isn't quite a plot twist per se, but rather a plot expansion. It gives us more information on the origin of Vandam and his machinery that we saw all the way back at the beginning, and pretty much finally confirms without any doubt that there is a third faction operating in this world. The one totally new piece of information regarding them we do get here is simply their name, which although not being anything mind-blowing is nice to know. Honestly, the fact we don't get a huge amount taught to us regarding the lost numbers here isn't a problem at all, since we're about to get so much more in such a short amount of time. I also think the moment where they smash their ships through the windows of a castle is a really satisfying one and makes for some great shots if nothing else. Finally, the N and M reveal is undeniably incredibly predictable. I'm sorry, but if you didn't see this coming, you need to have your eyes and ears checked. They're called N and M for Christ's sake. But I still like its presence here. It's good to have some absolute confirmation, especially regarding M, whose identity I felt was slightly less obvious, but still pretty obvious. And N's lines here also give us some amount of information regarding his motives, which is great to have. Up to this point, the game hadn't done much to develop or flesh out its villain ensemble, and so marking this as the point in the story where it will begin to do so makes a lot of sense to me. I also think it's probably the perfect moment to start doing this. We're about 60% of our way through the plot, leaving us with just enough time to do so, without having started it too early so as to distract from the foundations of what was to come. Let's move on to what I would view as the game's final act, chapters 5 to 7.